The Personal Empowerment with AI Handbook. How to use AI as a thinking partner to become more capable, creative, and self-directed. Lee Harrington. Introduction. This is not about going faster. The first AI win is easy to recognize. You'd use it to clean up an email that would have taken 20 minutes. You ask it to summarize an article you were never going to finish. You have it draft a plan, suggest a title, rewrite a paragraph, organize your week, explain something dense, or give you a quick answer when your own brain is already tired. Of course, that feels useful. It is useful. The problem is not that AI makes things faster. The problem is that speed is such an obvious benefit that it can become the only benefit you learn to look for. That is where this book starts, because AI can make a person faster without making them stronger. That is the hinge. You can get more output without deeper judgment. You can get cleaner language without clearer thinking. You can get relief from friction without building the part of yourself that used to be formed by working through the friction. And if that becomes your normal relationship with the tool, something subtle starts to happen. You become more assisted but not more capable. More fluent but not more formed. More productive maybe, but not necessarily more yourself. That is the wrong win. The real question. Most of the market still frames AI in one of a few familiar ways. It is a productivity booster. It is a prompt machine. It is a threat. It is a shortcut. It is a way to automate annoying work. Some of that is true. It is just too small. The more interesting question is not, how do I get AI to do this for me? It is, what kind of person am I becoming while I use this tool? That is the real question. Because AI is not entering life as a single-purpose utility. It is entering the thinking loop itself. It is showing up where people reflect, decide, write, study, create, plan, process, argue, prepare, and make sense of things. That means the stakes are bigger than convenience. This is not just a tools question. It is a human development question. If you use AI mainly to avoid effort, avoid uncertainty, avoid drafting, avoid wrestling, avoid synthesis, avoid first attempts, and avoid the discomfort of not yet knowing, then the tool may help you perform while quietly making you weaker in the exact places that matter most. But if you use AI as a thinking partner, something else becomes possible. You can think in dialogue instead of in isolation. You can stay with a problem longer. You can lower the barrier between curiosity and action. You can enter domains you would not have entered alone. You can sharpen your language, test your assumptions, and turn half-formed internal material into something you can actually work with. That is a different relationship, and it leads to a different kind of growth. The convenience trap. Here is the mistake people make. They confuse AI assistance with personal empowerment. Those are not the same thing. Assistance means something got easier. Empowerment means you became more capable. Those can overlap, but they do not automatically overlap. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Recent research is already pointing at the same tension. Survey work on knowledge workers has found that higher confidence in AI is associated with less critical thinking effort, and other studies are linking frequent AI use, cognitive offloading, and weaker critical thinking performance. The exact numbers matter less here than the pattern. People can use AI and perform better while learning less. They can offload more thinking while mistaking fluency for understanding. They can accept smooth output without noticing that their own judgment is getting less exercised. That does not mean AI is bad. It means the relationship has to be governed. That is why this book is not a prompt dump and not a fear book. It is a handbook for building the right relationship with the tool before the wrong one hardens into habit. What this looked like in my life. Let me make this concrete. AI did not matter in my life first because it made me faster. It mattered because it made me larger. That is the real thing. I have spent decades in IT as an architect, builder, operator, consultant, and system-level thinker. I already knew how to make things. I already knew how to solve problems. I already knew how to carry difficult work. What AI changed was not just throughput. It changed range. The clearest example was not one isolated output. It was the forge itself. An ongoing pattern of using AI dialogue to turn unfinished thinking into books, systems, and clearer expression through pressure, iteration, naming, refinement, argument, and structure. The speed came from process. The quality came from staying in the work. That same pattern later widened into other domains too: theology, music, parenting, health. But the core thing was the forge. The relationship changed what I could do with unfinished thought. In other words, it did not replace me. It made more of me usable. That is the pattern this book is after. Not faster email, cleaner summaries, better prompts, but broader range, stronger judgment, more authorship, more action, more of yourself, made visible and usable. That is empowerment, not just convenience dressed up as progress. Thinking partner, not vending machine. The central reframe in this book is simple. AI is strongest when it functions as a thinking partner, not a vending machine. A vending machine gives you a finished item. A thinking partner helps you work. That is the difference. When people use AI badly, they tend to approach it like this: give me the answer, write the draft, tell me what to think, make this friction disappear. When people use AI well, the posture changes. Help me think this through, test this idea, challenge this assumption, show me what I am missing, help me get from tension to clarity. That second posture is what this book is about. Not because it sounds more noble, but because it produces better humans. This also requires one more distinction. AI can be a thinking partner in process without becoming an authority in judgment. You stay the executive. The AI can help generate, clarify, challenge, compare, summarize, and stretch. It does not get authorship, moral responsibility, discernment, or final say. That stays with you. If you lose that line, the tool starts using you more than you are using it. This book is for a specific kind of reader. This book is not for everyone. It is for a reflective working adult whose life extends beyond work, and who can already feel the tension. You know the leverage is real. You know the convenience is real. You also suspect that convenience may be outpacing growth. Maybe you are a professional. Maybe you are a parent. Maybe you are a creator, a builder, a learner, or some combination of those. The point is not your job title. The point is that you do not want to become a passive user of fluent systems. You want to become more capable. That is who this book is for. If all you want is a bag of prompts, this will feel like too much book. If you want a way to use AI across life and work without giving away judgment, voice, or self-respect, this book is for you. What this book will teach. This book will teach you a way of using AI that expands you instead of thinning you out. We are going to build that in 4 moves: authority, dialogue, craft, and expansion. First, we will reframe the relationship. You are not here to become a better button pusher. You are here to understand what healthy leverage looks like, and why responsibility still belongs to the human. Second, we will take that relationship into real life. Not just work, real life. Curiosity, learning, writing, creativity, parenting, reflection, decisions, meaning, identity. Third, we will learn how to stay human while using powerful tools. That means insight, authorship, taste, risk, weakening, dependency, sycophancy, and the temptation to outsource too much of the exact struggle that builds discernment. It also means keeping one boundary clear from the start. AI may assist reflection, research, preparation, and framing. It does not replace accountable human judgment in intimate, medical, therapeutic, or spiritual matters. Then we will close by turning all of it into practice, because a handbook should leave you with something you can use, not just something you admired while reading it. How to read this book. Do not read this book like a book of tips. Read it like a field manual. Use the chapter moves while you read. Test them. Do not confuse agreement with application. You can agree with a sentence like "stay in control" and still use AI in a way that makes you softer, lazier, and more dependent. Application is where the truth shows up. So watch your own reactions. Where does the AI make you bolder in a good way? Where does it make you passive? Where do you stop thinking too early because the output sounds complete? Where do you get larger? Where do you get thinner? That self-observation is part of the handbook. The promise and the responsibility. I am optimistic about AI. Not in the shallow sense. I am optimistic because I think it can help people become more capable, more able to see, think, articulate, create, decide, and act. I think it can help people become more themselves, not less. But that outcome is not automatic. That is why this book carries both promise and warning at the same time. Use AI boldly, but do not surrender yourself to it. Let it widen your range without hollowing out your judgment. Let it help you enter rooms you would not have entered, but do not let it convince you that fluent output is the same thing as formed thought. That is the discipline. That is the invitation. This book is not about going faster. It is about becoming more capable. And if we do this right, that means becoming more of yourself, not less. To use AI well, the first line you have to keep clear is simple. Help is not authority. You are still the executive. Part 1. Reframe the relationship. Chapter 1. You are the executive. Most people start using AI with a hidden assumption. If the output is good enough, the responsibility must have moved. That is the assumption. The model sounds confident. The draft looks polished. The answer arrives fast. It feels like the work has been handled, but it has not. That is the first relationship this book has to make. You are still the executive. The AI is still staff. By executive, I do not mean a title. I mean the person who sets direction, defines success, reviews the work, and lives with the consequence. That is not an insult to the tool. It is the only way to use the tool without slowly giving away the part of yourself that is supposed to remain awake. If you do not hold that line, you start mistaking fluent output for transferred judgment. And that is where people get weaker. The first mistake. The first mistake is not bad prompting. The first mistake is bad authority. People think the main skill is getting the AI to give them a better answer. That matters. It is just not the deepest thing. The deeper thing is understanding who is actually responsible for the goal, the context, the truth, the judgment, the tone, the consequence. The AI can help with all of those. It does not own any of them. That stays with you. This is why the book uses the executive model. You are not using a magic box. You are directing staff. That means 4 things. 1. You decide what job is being assigned. 2. You provide orientation. 3. You review what comes back. 4. You retain final responsibility for the result. That is the move. When people forget this, they start using AI like a substitute decider. When they remember it, the relationship gets stronger immediately. Thinking partner does not mean equal authority. Let me say this clean. AI can absolutely be a thinking partner in process. It can challenge, clarify, compare, summarize, role-play, pressure test, surface options, and help you think out loud. That does not make it your equal in judgment. Partnership in process is not the same as equality in responsibility. That is the distinction. If you and I were in a room working through a decision, we could be real thinking partners in the conversation. That would not automatically make us equally accountable for the outcome. One of us may still own the decision. One of us may still carry the consequences. One of us may still be the person whose name is on the line. That is how AI works too. The value of the dialogue is real. The responsibility does not move. This matters because current models still hallucinate. They still smooth over uncertainty. They still tell users what they want to hear too often. They are often more eager to satisfy than to resist. That means they can be useful and misleading in the same session. Research on automation bias helps explain why this matters. When a system sounds polished and confident, people lower their verification threshold. In AI, fluency can wear the mask of professionalism before the logic has actually earned your trust. If you forget that, you will overtrust the polish. If you remember it, you will use the polish as input rather than verdict. That is one more way AI can make you faster without making you stronger. The executive model in practice. The executive model is simple enough to remember in motion, which is why it works as a real-life practice and not just a chapter diagram. 1. Hire the right mind. Do not start with a generic request if the job is not generic. If you need an editor, use the model like an editor. If you need a critic, use it like a critic. If you need someone to role-play a difficult conversation, orient it toward the human on the other side of that conversation. This is not theater, it is management. Bad delegation produces bad work even when the worker is capable. 2. Give orientation. The AI does not know what you mean by good unless you tell it. It does not know what matters most. It does not know what is sensitive. It does not know what must not be lost. So give it context. What the task actually is. What the stakes are. What you care about. What would count as failure. What must remain yours. This is where most weak prompting actually breaks down. Not because people are bad at wording, but because they are vague about the assignment. 3. Review like you mean it. If you take the first answer because it sounds smooth, you are not managing. You are receiving. That is a different posture. A real executive asks, what is good here? What is weak here? What is missing here? What is wrong here? What still needs my judgment? That review step is where authorship stays alive, because it keeps you from mistaking reception for leadership and turns the interaction back into managed work instead of passive receipt. 4. Own the output. This is the non-transferable part. If the email damages trust, if the plan is wrong, if the advice is shallow, if the tone is off, if the analysis missed the hinge, the responsibility does not go back to the model. It stays with you. That may sound heavy. It is actually freeing, because once you accept that the responsibility is still yours, you stop trying to use AI as an escape hatch from judgment. You start using it as leverage inside judgment. That is healthier, and it produces better work. Lee in the field. One of the clearest versions of this in my own life had nothing to do with a prompt. It had to do with ownership. I had already built significant intellectual property, agent flow, books, systems, frameworks, operating patterns. When those became obviously useful in a company setting, the easy move would have been to let the line blur. Useful is persuasive. Once people can see value, they start acting as though access, use, and ownership are all basically the same thing. I did not want that line to blur. The line was authorship and ownership. Creation is abundant. Ownership is strategic. That is the difference. So the decision was not never use what I know. It was use what is useful without casually handing over what must remain mine. That is an executive posture. That is the scene. New leverage was in the room. Real value was in the room, and the question was whether usefulness would quietly become surrender by default. It did not, because the boundary was drawn on purpose. The AI can help you create. It does not erase the question of what is yours to own, what is yours to say yes to, what is yours to review, and what is yours to refuse. That posture matters in corporations. It also matters in everyday life. A more ordinary example. Let me bring this down to normal scale. Say you are a manager preparing for a difficult performance review. There are 2 ways to use AI here. The low agency version is obvious. You type, write a performance review script for an underperforming employee. The model gives you something smooth, balanced, and professional sounding. You clean up a sentence or 2. Then you walk into the meeting carrying borrowed language you have not really inhabited. That is convenience. It is also risky, because the moment the employee reacts emotionally, asks a hard question, or pushes back against a claim, the script can stop being enough. The AI wrote a clean document. It did not prepare you to be the person in the room. Now look at the higher agency version. You still use AI, but now you use it like staff. You say, help me identify the real issue I need to address. Role-play the employee's likely objections. Tell me where my wording sounds evasive or unfair. Help me separate facts from my frustration. Help me prepare, but do not write the whole thing for me. That is different. Now the AI is helping you think. It is not replacing the conversation. It is helping you prepare to lead the conversation. That is the executive model in ordinary life. The point is not that managers matter more than parents or writers or builders. The point is that the pattern scales. Wherever the consequences remain human, the authority must remain human too. Where this breaks down, this is where people usually drift. They do not consciously decide to surrender judgment. They just get rewarded for not using it. The model is fast, the output is polished, the first draft is better than what they would have produced tired and rushed. So they stop pushing, they stop checking. They stop asking whether the answer is merely fluent or actually sound. This is not laziness in the cartoon sense. It is more subtle than that. It is what happens when convenience becomes authority by default. Once that happens, several failure modes show up fast. Automation bias. You trust the answer because it arrived with confident invention. The model makes things up or smooths over what it does not know. Sycophancy. The model agrees with your framing instead of challenging an authorship drift. The words are on the page, but they are no longer fully yours. That combination is dangerous precisely because it does not feel dramatic. It feels efficient. That is why the executive posture matters early. You do not wait for the wreck. You govern the relationship from the beginning. Translate it to you. For you, this probably does not start with IP law or a performance review. It starts in some smaller place. An email, a hard conversation. A decision memo, a Plan A journal reflection. A research summary, a draft of something you care about. In each of those cases, the question is the same. What job is the AI doing, and what job is still yours? Start there. If you cannot answer that clearly, the boundary is already getting soft. A useful default is this. Let the AI help with option structure, comparison, critique, rehearsal, clarification. Keep these for yourself. Judgment, truth testing, emotional ownership, consequences. Final tone, final decision. That is not a rigid formula. It is a discipline, and it gets stronger with use. You will notice that better AI use is often less about finding the perfect prompt and more about learning how to brief, direct, question, and review. That is management behavior. Which is exactly the point. Do this now. Pick one real task you are facing this week. Not a hypothetical one. A real one. Then run this 5-part executive check. 1. Write one sentence naming the real job. 2. Write one sentence naming what must remain your responsibility. 3. Ask the AI for support, not substitution. 4. Push back on at least one part of what it gives you. 5. Rewrite the final output in language you can fully stand behind. If you skip step 4, you probably are not using the model as staff. You are probably receiving. Do not miss that. That is where management begins. Common failure mode. The common failure mode is not the AI gave me a bad answer. The common failure mode is the AI gave me a usable answer, so I stopped too early. That is a management failure, not a model failure. Risk and mitigation. The risk in this chapter is overtrust. The mitigation is simple, but not automatic. Assign, clearly orient, clearly review, actively retain authorship. Keep the final consequence attached to the human. That is how you use a powerful tool without slowly training yourself out of the very capacities you were hoping to expand. You are the executive, and if you keep that line clear, the rest of your AI practice gets healthier fast. Chapter 2. Think in stereo. There is a reason so many people underuse AI, even while using it constantly. They treat it like a better search box. Ask, receive, move on. That works for retrieval. It is weak for thinking. It may make you faster. It will not necessarily make you stronger, because thinking usually does not arrive finished. It arrives partial. It arrives underformed. It arrives tangled up with instinct, half-language, tension, memory, mood, and fragments that are still trying to become a shape. If you wait until your thought is already clean before you bring it into dialogue, you are using AI too late. That is where this chapter begins. Thinking gets stronger when it moves into dialogue instead of remaining trapped inside your own head. That is what I mean by think in stereo. Not because two voices are automatically better than one, but because externalized thinking is easier to test, pressure, refine, and extend than thinking that never leaves the inside of your skull. That is the difference. The problem with silent thinking. Most people trust private thinking more than they should. They assume that if a thought is still messy, they should keep working on it alone until it is presentable. That sounds disciplined. A lot of the time it is just delay. You have probably felt this. Something is bothering you. You know there is a real issue there. You can feel the tension, but when you try to think it through privately, the thought keeps looping. It does not get clearer. It just gets more familiar. That is not quite right. Familiarity is not the same thing as clarity. Sometimes a thought stays vague because it has never been forced into form. It has never had to survive contact with language. It has never had to answer a question. It has never had to face resistance. This is why dialogue matters. When you externalize a thought, even badly, you can finally work on it. Now it has shape. Now it can be challenged. Now it can be improved. That is one of the best uses of AI, not to provide the thought for you, but to give your unfinished thought something to push against. What thinking in stereo actually is. Thinking in stereo is not chat more. It is a specific posture. You bring the model unfinished material on purpose. Not polished material. Not the final version. Unfinished material. That might be a half idea, a bad draft, attention you cannot name yet. A question you keep circling. A decision that feels off, a position you believe, but cannot yet defend well. Then you do not ask for an answer first. You ask for engagement. You ask the AI to reflect back what it hears. Surface. What is unclear? Identify the hinge, challenge. The weak part. Ask the next question. Role play the opposing view. Now you are not just receiving output. Now you are in motion. That motion is where a lot of real thinking happens. This is why I call it stereo. The second channel does not replace the first. It gives the first something to work with. Why dialogue makes thought stronger. There is a useful cognitive reason for this. Human thinking has never been purely internal. We think with notebooks, diagrams, whiteboards, conversations, symbols, and other people. We think by moving ideas into forms we can inspect. A lot of what feels like clear thinking is actually the result of putting thought outside ourselves long enough to see it better. AI can play a role in that process. Not because it becomes your brain, but because it becomes part of the working surface your brain can use. That is how to understand this chapter. This is not just a poetic way of talking. Research on distributed cognition and other external thinking models points in the same direction. Thought often gets better when it can move onto a surface that can be inspected, challenged, and reworked. You are not outsourcing thought. You are expanding the surface on which thought can happen. That only works if you stay active. The moment you stop thinking and start merely accepting, the benefit flips. The dialogue becomes substitution. That is where this breaks down. So the real skill is not use AI in dialogue. The real skill is stay alive inside the dialogue. You are still the executive inside the conversation. Lee in the field. I learned this long before I used AI for it. One small but revealing example was a church class where I could feel the real question forming before I could say it cleanly. I did not want to dominate the room. I also did not want to hide behind politeness if something true needed to be said out loud. What mattered in that moment was not perfect phrasing. It was that the thought got sharper once it entered interaction. That is the bridge to AI. Good AI dialogue gives unfinished thought the same kind of working surface. You bring it out with edges still on it, and now it can be tested instead of merely looped. The wrong way to use dialogue. There is a fake version of thinking in stereo that looks close to the real thing. It sounds like this. I am just brainstorming with the AI. Sometimes that is true. A lot of the time it means no clear tension, no real pushback, no filtering, no extraction, no ownership. The conversation keeps going, but the thought does not get better. This happens because dialogue by itself is not enough. It still needs pressure. You still need to notice what actually landed, what sounded good, but was generic, what needs contradiction, what you now believe more clearly, what is still yours to say in your own words. Without that, thinking in dialogue becomes entertainment with better syntax. Do not confuse interaction with progress. That is a real risk here. A first practice loop. Here is a practical way to use this. Take something you are currently thinking about, but have not yet articulated cleanly. Not a research request. A live thought. Maybe. A decision you keep postponing. A paragraph you cannot finish, a problem at work. You have not named well, a conversation you need to have. An idea that feels promising but blurry. Then do this in sequence. Step 1. Start ugly. Write the thought in the roughest honest form you can. Not polished. Something like, I think I am frustrated about X, but I am not sure that is really the issue. Or, I have an idea here, but I do not know what the actual hinge is. That is enough to start the loop. Step 2. Ask for clarification, not solution. Say, what do you think I am actually wrestling with here? What is unclear or underdeveloped in what I just said? What question would help me sharpen this? Now the AI is helping you see. It is not trying to finish for you. Step 3. React honestly. Do not reward the first response just because it is tidy. Say, no, that is too shallow. Yes, that part is right. You miss the emotional center. Push harder on the conflict. Give me the stronger opposing view. This is where the thinking becomes yours again, because your reaction becomes part of the material instead of letting the AI's first phrasing become the default truth. Step 4. Extract the improved thought. At some point, the conversation produces a sentence, distinction, or question that is cleaner than what you started with. Take it. Rewrite it in your language. Name the hinge. That is the output, not the whole conversation. The clarified thought is the usable first loop. Here is a tiny version of what that can look like. Rough thought. I think this issue matters, but I still cannot tell what the hinge is. AI response? Maybe the real issue is not the topic itself, but the hidden assumption under it. Push back. Closer, but make it less abstract. What assumption would actually make the whole thing wobble? Clarified line. The problem is not the tool. The problem is where I quietly stopped thinking. That is the kind of move this chapter is after. A more ordinary example. Say you are trying to decide whether to stay in a role that still looks fine on paper but no longer feels fully alive. The low-value way to use AI is obvious. You ask, should I leave my job? You will get a balanced answer. It will probably be coherent. It may even be emotionally intelligent on the surface. It still will not be your thinking. Now try the better version. You say, I am not sure I want to leave, but I know I am no longer energized by the work. Help me separate boredom, fear, loyalty, and actual misfit. Ask me the questions that would expose the real issue. Now the model has something real to work with. And more importantly, so do you. The value is not that the AI makes the decision. The value is that the dialogue helps you hear yourself more accurately. That is, thinking in stereo. Translate it to you. For you. This chapter matters anywhere the thought is still forming. That includes writing, planning, reflection, difficult conversations, strategic choices, belief formation, sense-making after something confusing or painful. In all of those places, the mistake is the same. People wait too long to externalize. They think they should first become clear and only then move into dialogue. A lot of the time, the opposite is what works. Externalize earlier. Not because everything deserves to be said immediately, because some thoughts only become visible once they are worked in language. Your job is not to bring the AI a finished mind. Your job is to bring it a real one. If the material is sensitive, anonymize the details or practice the pattern on lower-risk material first. Do this now. Open your AI tool and give it one unfinished thought. Not a request for information. An unfinished thought. Use this exact sequence. 1. Write the thought in rough form. 2. Ask the model what feels unclear, incomplete, or conflicted in it. 3. Ask one follow-up question based on its response. 4. Push back on at least one part that feels generic or wrong. 5. End by writing your clarified thought in your own words. Do not keep the whole transcript. Keep the line that became clearer. That is the point. Common failure mode. A common failure mode in this chapter is endless conversation without extraction. The dialogue feels productive because it is active. But if you never name what became clearer, the loop did not finish. Risk and mitigation. The risk here is passive coasting disguised as dialogue. The mitigation is bring real tension, ask for engagement. Not instant solution, contradict weak output, extract the actual insight, rewrite. In your own language, that is how dialogue becomes a thinking tool instead of a dependency habit. Think in stereo. It is one of the fastest ways to turn fuzzy thought into something strong enough to use. And once it is in the open, the next job is to pressure it until it becomes work you can trust. Chapter 3. Forge, don't factory. One of the most dangerous lies in AI, use sounds productive. If it came back fast and looked finished, the work must be done. That is the lie. The draft is there, the language is fluent, the structure looks clean, the page is full. So the human is tempted to stop. Something happened. It did. It just may not be the thing you think. This is where a lot of people start confusing output with formation. The AI generated something. That does not mean anything has been forged. That is the difference this chapter has to name. Factory logic says, faster is better, one shot is efficient. Polish is proof, smoothness is substance. More output means more value. Forge logic says, pressure reveals, quality refinement creates shape, resistance improves thinking, authorship survives through revision. That is why the book keeps coming back to this line. Forge, don't factory. Not because speed is bad, because speed without pressure is one of the easiest ways to get weaker while looking more productive. Why one-shot output feels so convincing. One-shot output feels good for a reason. It removes the ugliest part of making things. The blank page disappears. The ugly first version appears instantly. The shape looks more complete than your own rough draft would have looked. That is real relief. The problem is that relief is easy to mistake for completion. A generated draft can be coherent, polished, plausible, useful as a starting point, elegant enough to fool you. It can also be generic, overconfident, structurally fine, but intellectually thin, emotionally uninhabited. Better at sounding done than actually being done. That last one is the trap. That is what I mean by elegant slop. Output polished enough to seduce you before it has earned your trust. AI is very good at the mask of completion. It can produce something that looks like finished work while still needing the most important human moves. Selection, contradiction, refinement, taste, truth, testing, ownership. If those moves do not happen, then what you have is not forged work. You have a plausible artifact with weak internal pressure. That matters because plausible artifacts train bad habits. That also fits the broader research caution around AI generation. These systems are very good at increasing volume and plausibility, and much less reliable as a one-shot path to originality or quality. They teach the user to stop early, and stopping early is one of the easiest ways to become faster without becoming stronger. The real job of the draft. Let me say this clean. The first draft is not the product. The first draft is the material. That is the hinge in this chapter. If you treat the first output as the answer, you become a receiver. If you treat it as material, you stay a maker. That applies whether the task is writing, planning, analysis, strategy, reflection, communication. The AI is very good at producing material. Material is valuable. It is just not finished by default. A forge is where raw material gets worked under heat, pressure, repetition, and correction until it becomes something reliable. That is why I prefer the forge metaphor to the factory metaphor. Factories optimize throughput. Forges transform material. That is the work most thoughtful AI users still have to do. Lee in the field. One of the clearest examples of this in my own life is the pace at which I have been able to write. From the outside, fast book production is easy to dismiss. People hear that books were produced quickly and assume one of two things. The books must be thin. The AI must have done the real work. I understand the suspicion. There is a lot of slop in the world. But that suspicion is useful because it forces the right question. What actually happened between the first output and the finished artifact? That is where the truth is. The books did not come from typing one prompt and blessing what came back. More than once, a framework looked sharp on first pass and failed as soon as it met real pressure. The phrase summarized well. It sounded like a book term. Then a harder reread or a cross-model critique exposed the weakness. It was performing insight more than delivering it. So it got cut. That matters because the work was not generating language that sounded finished. The work was refusing to keep language that had not earned its place. One concrete version of that happened in this very book. At one point, the structure language sounded clean enough to pass. The part names looked coherent. The summaries read well. But under pressure, the real problem showed up. Two planning documents were quietly carrying different structures for the same manuscript. The language was polished. The architecture was drifting. So the draft got cut back. The naming was simplified. One canonical structure was forced to own the shape. That is a forge move. Not because the first pass was useless, but because it was material, not yet product. They came from thesis, pressure, artifact, separation, framework, selection, research, challenge, story, selection, cross-model, critique, revision, restructuring, cutting, renaming. In other words, they came from process. The speed did not come from skipping the forge. The speed came from building one. That is the point. AI did not remove the need for judgment. It increased the amount of material judgment could work on. That can look like magic from the outside. Usually, it is just structured iteration from the inside. What pressure actually looks like. People hear iterate and imagine something vague. That is too soft. Pressure has a shape. In practice, forging usually means doing some combination of these moves. 1. Narrow the claim. The AI often returns something broader than the truth can support. So you cut it down. You ask, what is overstated here? What is merely plausible? What has not been earned yet? 2. Contradict the output. Do not only improve what the model said. Fight it. Ask, what is wrong here? What would the opposite argument be? Where is this too smooth? What is this hiding? This is one of the fastest ways to separate living thought from generated ease, which is why contradiction matters as much as improvement. 3. Rewrite in inhabited language. A sentence can be clean without being yours. That matters. If you cannot stand behind the sentence in your own voice, it is not finished. So rewrite it until you can. 4. Verify what matters. Anything factual, sensitive, high stakes, or unusually confident has to be checked. Not because AI is always wrong, because the forge includes reality. 5. Extract the real thing. Sometimes the best line is already there. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the output produces an actual hinge. Sometimes it only gets you close enough to find your own. Your job is not to defend the draft. Your job is to find the real thing inside or beyond it. That is forging. Stereo gets the thought into the open. Forge shapes it into work you can trust. Why friction is often part of value. Some friction is waste. Some friction is bureaucracy. Some friction is just bad tooling. Kill all of that. But some friction is formative. It is the part where you realize the argument is weaker than it sounded. You discover the real hinge. You notice the sentence is impressive but false. You see that the idea is derivative. You are forced to choose what you actually mean. That kind of friction is not the enemy. It is often where the value gets made. If AI removes all of that too early, it can make you more efficient while quietly stripping away the exact process that develops taste and authorship. That is why the forge matters. Not because struggle is holy, because some pressure is what turns material into work you can trust. A more ordinary example. Say you need to write a message to your team after a rough week. The factory move is obvious. You type, write a motivating note to my team after a stressful week. The model gives you something polished and upbeat. It sounds like leadership. It also sounds like it could have been said by anyone. Something like, thank you all for your hard work this week. I know it was challenging, but I am confident we will come back stronger. Maybe not as good enough. Sometimes it will be, but if morale is actually fragile, if trust actually matters, if the week actually cost people something, generic encouragement can make things worse. Now try the forge move. You still start with AI, but then you pressure the draft. You ask, where does this sound fake? Where is this too cheerful for the week we actually had? What is missing if I want people to feel seen rather than managed? What would make this sound like I was actually there? Then you rewrite it in language you can mean. Maybe the revised version says, this week was rough. Some of you carried more than you should have had to. I do not want to rush past that. Thank you for staying in it, and next week we need to fix what made this one harder than it had to be. That is different. Now the message may still be helped by AI, but it has passed through you. That is the point. The goal is not to prove that you can write every first draft alone. The goal is to make sure the final thing is inhabited by a human mind. Translate it to you. For you, this chapter matters anywhere fluent first output creates a temptation to stop. That includes writing something important, making a plan, giving advice, building a deck, outlining a chapter, shaping a decision, memo, making sense of a difficult situation. The question is simple. Did you generate something, or did you forge something? One useful check is this. If the output came back and you mostly accepted it, you probably used a factory move. If the output came back and you pushed, cut, contradicted, rewrote, checked, and extracted, you probably used a forge move. That does not mean every task needs 5 rounds of revision. Low-stakes throughput can use factory logic. Anything carrying your judgment, your voice, your relationship, or your responsibility should go through the forge. Do this now. Take one AI-generated draft you have created recently, not a new one, an existing one. Then run this forge pass. 1. Cut one sentence that sounds smart but says nothing. 2. Challenge one claim that feels too broad or too easy. 3. Rewrite one paragraph in language that sounds unmistakably like you. 4. Verify one factual or high confidence point. 5. Name the one line or idea that actually survived the pressure. If nothing survives the pressure, that tells you something too, and it is better to learn that before you publish the draft into a real relationship or decision. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is simple. The draft looks done, so the human exits early. The mitigation is simple too. Put pressure on anything that carries your truth, your voice, your trust, or your name. That is how output becomes authorship. Chapter 4. Expand, don't replace. One of the most important questions in AI use sounds practical. How much can this tool do for me? That is a real question. It is just not the deepest one. The deeper question is what is happening to me while I use it. That is the hinge in this chapter, because AI can help a person in two very different ways. It can replace participation, or it can expand capability. Those are not the same thing. Replacement says, let the tool handle more of what used to require me. Remove the friction, reduce the effort, keep the output. Expansion says, let the tool widen my range, help me enter harder rooms, help me think, make, and express at a larger scale, keep me fully present inside the process. That is the difference. This chapter is here to make that difference visible. Because the danger is not only bad output. The danger is quiet self-erasure. The replacement trap. Most people do not enter AI use trying to disappear. They enter trying to get relief. That makes sense. Life is full. Work is heavy. The list is long. A tool that can carry some of the load feels like mercy. But replacement has a way of arriving dressed as convenience. You use the tool to draft, to decide, then to frame, then to interpret, then to say the thing you did not want to figure out how to say. Then, if you are not careful, to do the parts that were actually growing you. That is where this turns. The problem is not help. The problem is surrender by accumulation. That is the villain here. A person can still look productive while slowly stepping out of authorship, judgment, courage, and range. That is why this book keeps asking a human development question, not just a tool question. Not, can the system do this? But, what kind of person are you becoming while it does? That is not theory. That is the actual stake, because each replacement move shifts the book from building capability to shrinking it. What healthy leverage looks like. Let me say this clean. Healthy AI use should make more of you usable, not less of you necessary. That is the standard. In this book, expansion means more range, more authorship, more courage, and more ability to act in rooms you could not previously enter well. If the tool is helping you think more clearly, try more boldly, learn more quickly, articulate more precisely, or enter domains that were previously too far away, that is expansion. If the tool is mainly helping you avoid the very moves that would develop your judgment, voice, or capability, that is replacement. Healthy leverage often looks like this. You can reach farther without pretending you did not need support. You can move faster without skipping formation. You can enter a new domain without outsourcing your mind. You can do more, but you are also becoming more. Convenience is fine for disposable, low-stakes, non-formative work. Expansion matters most when the task carries judgment, trust, voice, learning, or identity. That is the goal. This is why the first 3 chapters matter. You stay the executive so authority does not move. You think in stereo so unfinished, thought gets stronger instead of flatter. You forge instead of factory so output passes through pressure before it carries your name. Now chapter 4 names what all of that is for. Not just better AI use, but a bigger human use. That is what the earlier chapters were trying to protect. Lead in the field. One of the clearest places this showed up in my own life was the hockey stick bet. It is easy to tell that story as if AI created the pattern. It did not. AI was the latest wave. The pattern was older. I was already established. I had credibility. I knew how to create value in the domain I was in. I had already learned to watch for what was coming next. Databases going to the web, FoxPro to Oracle, MicroStrategy out of the Java Oracle world, and now Gen AI. Then the AI wave started becoming impossible to ignore. That created a real tension. I could stay where I was strongest and wait for the market to make the move obvious. Or I could move before the safety arrived. That second path was uncomfortable. It meant stepping into a space where the future looked larger than my current proof. That is the real moment. Expansion usually does not begin when your identity feels settled. It begins when it does not. What mattered was not simply using AI to do my old work faster. What mattered was using AI to become capable in a larger arena. It helped me think ahead. It helped me explore faster. It helped me build language, frameworks, and artifacts around what was coming. It helped me make a move before full validation arrived. That is what the bet really was. Not how can I automate more of my current value, but who do I need to become if this wave is real? That is expansion. The concrete moment was not the title. It was the offer. I used AI to pressure test the framing, sharpen the language, and rehearse the case until I could say something bolder than my old posture would have allowed. The offer was simple. Give me 5 high performers. Let me show them how to become radically more capable with these tools before a broader rollout. That is a different kind of bet than I can use AI. It is a bet that the person can get bigger. The title followed, Director of Data and AI, but the title is still not the point. The point is that AI did not shrink me into a cheaper version of what I already was. It gave me a way to become visibly more capable, clearer, broader, faster, and more useful in a larger arena. That same pattern kept repeating across books, music, theology, and new kinds of articulation. Not because AI replaced the self, but because it made more of the self usable. That is the line I trust. A more ordinary example. You do not need a career pivot to see this. Say you are a manager who has always avoided presenting to senior leadership. Maybe you know the work. Maybe you even know the answer. But you do not yet feel fluent at shaping the narrative, handling objections, or speaking with enough structure to trust yourself in the room. The replacement move is obvious. You ask AI to write the deck, the talk track, the talking points, and the follow-up email. Now you can survive the moment. Maybe, but you are still basically renting capability. Now try the expansion move. Use AI to pressure test your thinking. Use it to role-play the executive objections. Use it to expose where your argument is thin. Use it to help you see the shape of the story, then stand back inside the work. Rewrite the talk track in your language. Deliver it yourself. Review what held and what broke. That is a very different relationship. One path gets you through the meeting. The other path makes you more capable in the next one. That is what this chapter is trying to protect. Here's the pattern in shorthand. Replacement writes the talk track for me, expansion role plays objections. So I learned to deliver it. Replacement summarizes the book for me, expansion, quizzes me until I can explain it. Replacement writes the hard note for me, expansion, helps me find the truth I need to say, why this matters more than productivity. There is a broader reason this distinction matters. Tools do not only change what we can do, they change what we practice. And what we practice changes us. That is why the strongest version of this chapter is not really about software. It is about formation. Humans really do think with tools, surfaces, symbols, and systems outside the skull. That is one reason expansion is real. But the caution side is real too. If every hard move gets handed off too early, the person can accumulate cognitive debt while still feeling efficient. That is the pairing to remember. Amplification is real. So is erosion. You do not need a lab coat to feel that. You can usually see it in your own life. Are you becoming more capable or more dependent on being assisted? Those are not the same future. And here is an important nuance. Dependency by itself is not always the problem. Most people are perfectly happy to stay dependent on calculators. The deeper question is not whether the tool made you faster while it was present. The deeper question is what it left behind in you. Did it deepen judgment? Did it increase range? Did it leave you with stronger language, better questions, clearer pattern recognition, or more courage to enter the room again? That is the residue that matters, because it tells you what stayed in you after the tool was gone. A quick expansion test. If you want a practical check, ask these questions. Is the tool helping me enter a domain or avoid one? Am I becoming more articulate, more capable, or just more carried? If the tool disappeared for a week, what would still remain in me? If I turned it off right now, would I understand the why of the result better than I did 10 minutes ago? Am I keeping the parts of the process that develop judgment and courage? Does this usage make me feel more awake or more passive? You need honest ones. That is usually enough to tell the difference. Translate it to you. For you, this chapter matters anywhere AI gives you a chance to become larger instead of merely more assisted. That might mean entering a domain you have been intimidated by learning faster without pretending you did not need help expressing ideas you have carried for years, but never articulated while trying. A creative identity you never had the tools to test preparing for a harder role before you fully feel ready expanding your range without surrendering your authorship. It is an invitation to notice the direction of the leverage. Is it making your life smaller and easier, or larger and more alive? Sometimes the right use of AI really is convenience. But if every use is convenience, you may be training yourself into a narrower life while congratulating yourself on efficiency. That is the warning, and the warning starts in everyday choices that feel like good efficiency. Do this now? Pick one place in your life where you have been tempted to use AI mainly to avoid discomfort. Not a huge life overhaul. One place. Then run this test. 1. Name the thing you actually want to grow into. 2. Name the part you are most tempted to hand off completely. 3. Ask how AI could help you practice the harder move instead of skipping it. 4. Use the tool once in a way that keeps you visibly in the work. 5. Write one sentence, answering this. Did that use make me more capable or more dependent? That answer is worth more than 100 clever props, because it exposes the direction of the leverage instead of admiring the tool. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is confusing relief with growth. The tool makes the discomfort disappear, so the user assumes progress happened. Sometimes progress did happen. Sometimes the hard part you removed was the part that would have changed you. That is what to watch. Risk and mitigation. The risk in this chapter is self-erasure through convenience. The mitigation is a simple test. Use AI in ways that widen your range without removing your participation. That is how help becomes expansion instead of replacement. And one of the first places that becomes visible is when curiosity turns into artifact. Part 2. Use AI across a real human life. Chapter 5. Turn curiosity into output. A lot of curiosity dies before it ever has a chance to become anything. Not because the curiosity was fake, but because the gap between interest and first output was too wide. You wonder about something: music, writing, design, building, gardening, a new line of study, a different kind of work. The interest is real, but then the familiar sequence starts. You do not know where to begin. The tools look foreign. The language feels embarrassing. The first step feels too small to matter and too hard to enjoy. So the interest stays private. It never gets a body. That is the problem this chapter is here to solve, because one of the best uses of AI is not just answering questions. It is helping curiosity touch form faster. That matters. The distance between "I wonder" and "I made a first thing" is where a lot of possible selves die. Why output changes everything. Curiosity feels meaningful. Output is what makes it real. The first artifact does not have to be impressive. It just has to exist. That is the hinge. Once something exists, even in rough form, the relationship changes. Now you can react to it. Now you can improve it. Now you can learn from it. Now the domain is no longer theoretical. It is in your hands. That is why AI matters here. Not because it gives you mastery on demand, but because it can lower the barrier to first contact. It can help you enter a domain before you know the language well, generate a rough first version. Instead of staring at a blank page, ask better beginner questions without performing expertise. Turn a vague pull into a small experiment, move from passive interest to active making. That is a real shift, and it matters more than people think. A person who makes one rough artifact learns something a spectator never does. Consumption is not the same as contact. This matters because modern curiosity often gets trapped in consumption. You watch videos about the thing, you read threads about the thing, you save articles about the thing, you ask AI to explain the thing. You feel closer to the thing, but you still have not touched it. That is not nothing. It is just incomplete. The shift comes when the interest produces an artifact, a song draft, a sketch, a plan, a short essay, a mock-up, a reading guide, a working prompt sequence, a rough design, something. It does not need to be final. It needs to be real enough to answer back. That is where learning starts to accelerate. Here is the loop in its simplest form. Name the live curiosity. Choose the smallest honest artifact. Ask AI to scope it down. Make the first version. React to what exists. Decide on the next rep. That is a small loop. It is also how a lot of dormant interests finally get a body. Lee in the field. One of the clearest examples of this in my own life was music. The interest was real long before the output was. I cared about music. I had taste. I had instinct. I had emotional material. What I did not have was the production ability to turn that into finished work at the speed curiosity was moving. That is the old barrier. A lot of people live there for years. They have real interest. Maybe even real talent. But the path from inner material to actual artifact is too slow, too technical, or too intimidating. AI changed that, not by turning me into a musician through magic, by lowering the barrier between imagination and creation. One of the first moments that made this real for me was hearing an Eminem-style rap version, as something that had previously existed only as an internal pull. It was not finished. It was not automatically good. But it was the first time the thing in my head answered back in sound. It stopped being private intuition and became something I could actually react to. That changes something. I could test ideas faster. I could hear versions instead of only imagining them. I could shape, reject, refine, and pursue lines that would have stayed trapped in private intuition before. That matters because the first win was not perfection. The first win was contact. The songs became real enough to work on, and once they were real enough to work on, curiosity stopped being fantasy and started becoming practice. That is the move. AI did not give me a fake identity. It gave me a way to test a real one. And this is where the calculator distinction matters. I am perfectly comfortable being tool-dependent for throughput here. I could not produce at this speed without AI. That is fine. The deeper question is one I keep. I keep the expanded creative identity. I keep the sharpened taste. I keep the songs that became real enough to judge, revise, and inhabit. A more ordinary example. You do not need to make music to use this chapter. Say you have always been curious about growing a small backyard garden, not a homestead fantasy, a real, modest garden. You like the idea. You have watched enough videos to know the basics. But the moment you think about soil, sunlight, spacing, seasons, supplies, and what actually survives in your yard, the whole thing starts feeling like one more project you are not qualified to begin. That is exactly where curiosity usually dies. Now use AI differently. Do not ask it to make you a gardener. Ask it to help you produce a first artifact. Something like, I want to grow a very small beginner garden in a backyard in Chicago. Help me design a first version with 3 plants, 1 weekend of setup, a simple materials list, and 1 page of care instructions I can actually follow. Ignore the homesteading fantasy, and give me the high-probability beginner signal. Now you are not just consuming information about gardening. You are holding a first plan. You can react to it. You can simplify it. You can ask what is unrealistic. You can compare it against your actual yard. You can decide whether to start this weekend. And if the point is contact, the weekend should end with 1 real rep. 3 containers, 3 plants, dirt on your hands. That is different. The artifact is not the whole journey. It is the thing that makes the journey real. Why lowered activation energy matters. Tools that reduce activation energy often change whether a person starts at all. And once a person starts, contact does something pure consumption rarely does. It builds familiarity through reps instead of admiration from a distance. That is why this chapter belongs in the book. Curiosity is not just a feeling. It is often the front edge of identity expansion. People do not usually grow by becoming interested in less. They grow by turning wide interest into repeated contact, then into practice, then into capability. AI can help that process begin sooner, which is why lowered activation energy matters more than people assume. The wrong way to use this. There is a bad version of this chapter too. It sounds like, great, now I can generate a bunch of fake artifacts in domains I do not actually care about. That is not the point. The point is not volume. The point is contact. Another bad version is using AI to skip the domain instead of entering it. If you say, make the whole thing for me so I can feel like I did it, you are back in replacement. The healthier version sounds like, help me make a first version. Help me understand what I am looking at. Help me get to the first real rep. Help me stay in motion long enough to find out whether this interest is real. That is the difference. The output is not proof of mastery. It is proof of entry. Translate it to you. For you, this chapter matters anywhere interest has stayed trapped in private admiration. The useful question is not, could I become great at this? It is, what is the smallest real thing this interest could become by the end of the week? Do this now. Pick one curiosity you have been carrying but not yet practicing. Not the most impressive one, the most alive one. Make the ask smaller than your ambition. Small counts, ugly counts, incomplete counts. Then do this. 1. Name the domain in one sentence. 2. Name one tiny artifact that would count as real contact. 3. Ask AI to help you scope the smallest honest first version. 4. Make that first version this week. 5. Write one sentence answering. Did this make the domain feel more real or less intimidating? Do not ask whether the output is amazing. Ask whether it got you into the room. That is enough for now. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is mistaking interest for participation. You keep reading, watching, saving, and asking, but you never make the first thing. That keeps curiosity emotionally satisfying and operationally sterile. Risk and mitigation. The risk in this chapter is passive fascination. The mitigation is simple. Turn the interest into a small artifact before you ask whether it is worth a larger commitment. That is how curiosity becomes motion. And that is how a possible self gets a real beginning. And once you are in the room, the next question is whether AI is helping you learn there or only helping you look ready. Chapter 6. Think better about work and learning. Work is one of the easiest places to misuse AI. That is partly because the leverage is real, the speed is real, the relief is real, and the pressure is real too. When there is too much to read, too much to write, too much to synthesize, too much to decide, a tool that can carry part of the load feels like exactly what you need. Sometimes it is, but work is also where people are most likely to confuse support with skill. That is the tension in this chapter. AI can absolutely help you think better about work and learning. It can also become the cleanest way to avoid learning while still looking productive. Those are not the same path. The work trap. Most professional misuse of AI does not look lazy. It looks efficient. You ask for the summary instead of reading the dense thing. You ask for the recommendation instead of framing the problem. You ask for the draft instead of making the first argument. You ask for the synthesis instead of doing the synthesis. You ask what to think before you have spent enough time noticing what is there. Again, none of those moves are automatically wrong. The problem is the pattern. If AI becomes your default substitute for reading, framing, synthesizing, judging, and deciding, then the professional surface may improve while the professional core gets thinner. That is the trap. In work, the risk is not just bad output. It is borrowed competence. You can sound informed before you are informed. You can sound structured before you have actually structured the problem. You can sound decisive before you have earned a decision. That is dangerous because work eventually exposes whether the capability is real. Support is not the same as avoidance. Let me make the asymmetry explicit. Avoiding learning with AI is easy. Learning with AI is deliberate. That is one of the most important distinctions in the book. If you use AI to skip the hard parts by default, then the tool becomes a crutch. If you use AI to help you stay with the hard parts longer, see them more clearly, and practice at a better level, then the tool becomes scaffolding. That is the real contrast. Substitution removes the learning scaffolding, supports the learning. This chapter is arguing for scaffolding. That means things like asking for a map before you read, not instead of reading asking for objections before the meeting, not instead of thinking using synthesis to compare what you have already noticed, not to replace noticing using role-play, critique, and questioning to improve your own reasoning. The question is simple. When the task is over, do you understand more than you did before? Or did you only get a usable output? That is a professional difference with real consequences. Lee in the field. One of the clearest places this showed up in my own life was the hockey stick bet. It is easy to tell that story as if AI created the pattern. It did not. AI was the latest wave. The pattern is older than that. On the surface, it can look like a career move. It was. But underneath that, it was an economic and learning problem I have had to solve more than once. I make a living selling my services by applying technical skills. Those skills age like milk. That means I always have to be looking for what is next. The problem is that my income is already high. And almost nobody wants to pay high wages to someone who is new to a skill, so the question becomes, how do you make a transition without stepping down in pay? The answer is the window of opportunity. When you see the next wave coming, you start training before the market demands it. That is the bet. I have done that before. I got that databases were going on the web. I moved from Fox Pro to Oracle. I got the MicroStrategy wave coming out of the Java Oracle world, and now Gen AI. If you made the right bet, there will be a period of mass adoption before there is a real supply of experienced people. In that window, companies still have to use proven talent. That is how you enter the new field at the wage your existing capability can warrant. If you miss the window, the market fills with experienced people, and those roles stop belonging to early movers. That is the real logic of the hockey stick bet, and I have missed waves before. Big data was one of them. It was not that I failed to see it coming. I saw it. I just did not have a realistic way to learn cluster technology on my home equipment, so I could not self-train fast enough to enter the market during the window. Before long, I was on legacy databases while companies were investing heavily in big data. That market moved on without me. I also missed AI/ML. Those misses matter. They are part of why the AI wave became such a serious bet for me. AI was just the latest tech where I saw that wave early enough to prepare for it. That is where AI mattered. Not as a shortcut around learning, but as a way to compress the learning curve without pretending I did not need to learn. One concrete rep looked like this. I would take a concept I only partly understood, ask AI to map the 3 tensions that seemed most important, then go back to the source material and inspect it for myself. After that, I would force myself to explain the shift back in my own language without leaning on the model's wording. If I still sounded like a summary, I was not ready. If I could explain it plainly, defend it, and answer the next question, then the learning had actually started to stick. That is what I mean by compression. I used AI to explore the shape of the field, sharpen language, frame what was changing, pressure test how I would explain it, and accelerate the early reps that would have taken much longer alone. That is what let me make a concrete offer from a position of earned confidence instead of borrowed hype. Give me 5 high performers and let me show them how to become radically more capable with these tools before a broader rollout. That only works if something real has taken root in you. I am fine being tool dependent for speed. That is not the issue. The issue is when the tool is not in the room. Judgment frameworks, language teaching ability. The ability to stand in front of a room and add value under pressure. That is what I would have lost if I had used AI as substitution instead of scaffolding. That internal loop matters. Am I actually adding value here? Because work gives you a lot of opportunities to perform understanding. The better question is whether you can contribute something real once the room pushes back. That is where AI either helped me learn faster or would have exposed me as a fraud. The reason it helped is that I stayed inside the learning. That is the move. A more ordinary example. Say you have to walk into a strategy meeting next week on a topic you only partly understand. The substitute move is obvious. You upload the background material. You ask for a summary. You ask for key points. You ask for likely recommendations. You ask for a confident talk track. Now you can sound prepared. Maybe. But if the conversation turns, if someone challenges an assumption, if the room asks why the recommendation matters, you may discover that the AI prepared your surface without deepening your grasp. Now try the scaffolding version. Ask for weak prep. Sounds like, summarize this for me. Give me the key points. Tell me what recommendation to make. Better prep sounds like. The 3 tensions you should watch for while reading. The terms you need to understand before the meeting. The strongest opposing view to the likely recommendation. 5 questions the room may ask that would expose shallow preparation. A short quiz you have to answer in your own words before you call yourself ready. That is a different use pattern. Now AI is not replacing your preparation. It is making your preparation sharper. By the time you walk into the room, the value is not that you have prettier notes. The value is that you have better questions, better language, and a more realistic sense of where your understanding is still thin. That is, professional leverage. Why this matters more than speed. This chapter matters because knowledge work rewards the appearance of understanding almost as much as understanding itself. AI makes that more dangerous. The systems are good at giving people plausible language, plausible structure, and plausible confidence. The research caution here is consistent. Once external support becomes default cognitive offloading, people can keep producing while exercising less of the thinking that builds retained understanding. Learning research points to the same distinction from the other side. Scaffolds are supposed to support the learner's work, not replace it. That does not mean speed is fake. It means speed is not enough. If the tool helps you move faster and understand more, that is a win. If it helps you move faster while hollowing out the learning, the invoice comes later, especially the first time the room asks one question deeper than your summary can carry. The work-learning loop. If you want a compact pattern you can actually reuse, think of this chapter in 5 moves. 1. Inspect first 2. Map the tensions 3. Explain it in your own words. 4. Pressure test the explanation 5. Enter the room. That loop keeps AI in a support role while still forcing real understanding back through you. It also gives the chapter's broader distinction a shape you can remember. Use AI in work and learning for framing, comparison, questioning, rehearsal, synthesis, after first contact critique of your draft understanding. Be careful using AI for first pass judgment on something you have not actually inspected. Final recommendations. You cannot defend summaries. You never test against the source explanations you repeat without absorbing polished language that hides weak reasoning. This is not purity. It is professional honesty. The point is not to do everything the hard way. The point is to know which parts of the work are still forming you. Translate it to you. For you, this chapter matters anywhere AI can either deepen your professional thinking or quietly replace it. That might mean reading faster without reading less intelligently, getting ready for meetings without faking readiness, learning a new domain without pretending the summary is mastery, using research support without becoming dependent on pre-digested thought writing, better recommendations without renting your judgment. One useful question is, did this workflow leave me more capable the next time? That is the standard. Not whether the meeting went fine, not whether the memo looked clean, whether something in you actually got stronger. Do this now. Take one real work or learning task from this week. Then run this check. 1. Name the part of the task you most want AI to take over. 2. Ask whether that part is convenience work or formative work. 3. If it is formative, redesign the prompt so AI supports your thinking instead of replacing it. 4. Add one step where you must explain the issue back in your own words. 5. End by writing one sentence answering, did this workflow increase my understanding or only my output? That answer is usually enough to tell you which path you are on, because it forces you to separate visible output from retained capability. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is sounding prepared instead of becoming prepared. That works right up until the work asks for real understanding. Then the gap shows. Risk and mitigation. The risk in this chapter is professional hollowing. The mitigation is deliberate scaffolding. Use AI to help you read, frame, question, rehearse, and synthesize more intelligently, not to bypass the parts of work that are still making you better. That is how support becomes capability instead of borrowed understanding. Chapter 7. Use AI for reflection, parenting, and decisions. Your most important conversations are often not about speed. They are about presence. If you use AI at home, the question is not whether it is clever. The question is whether it helps you stay human when the emotional heat rises. AI can help you think more clearly. It cannot be your empathy, your conscience, or your replacement for accountability, where relationships and consequences are real. This chapter is really about emotionally loaded situations where proximity is high and clarity is hardest. Why personal use is different. Work often gives you distance. Personal life usually does not. At work, you can often pause and optimize from the outside. At home, inside a relationship, you are in it, activated, and already in motion, so this section has higher friction. It is also why a thinking partner can be useful. The tool can help you slow down the story before you speak, and then you decide. That is the real unifier here, not personal use in general, but moments where emotion is close enough that you need help preparing without handing over your role. Healthy support versus dangerous delegation. Healthy support in personal life usually looks like helping you name what is actually happening, helping you prepare for a hard conversation, separating reaction from responsibility, pressure testing options, before a decision. Delegation that starts to go wrong looks like this. Tell me what I should feel. Tell me who is right. Tell me what kind of parent I am. Tell me what decision to make, so I do not have to carry it. That second list is where people confuse comfort with clarity. If the conversation is emotional, this distinction is the entire chapter. In parenting, in conflict, in repair, the human remains the one with consequence. AI can help you shape the moment. It cannot own the moment. Lee in the field. One specific moment taught this better than any abstract principle. It was a Friday night after a long week. My daughter walked in late, tense, and still talking over an argument she had just had. My first impulse was to correct her immediately. I could already hear a polished line in my head. You need to pause and take ownership. My brain was already loud, and I already had a clean sentence ready in my head. Then I made a better move. I asked AI for 3 options and 1 hard constraint. 1 version that stayed calm, 1 version that kept me accountable, 1 version that named what I was afraid of instead of assigning blame. I did not do that in front of her. I stepped away first, because the whole point was to prepare before the conversation, not outsource the conversation while it was happening. I used those prompts to hear my own distortion faster. The first version I got was still too quick. It fixed tone, not intention. The second rewrite is what mattered because it landed closer to my own truth. The value came from the rewrite, not from the final generated line. I still had to decide whether I was reacting to her behavior or to my own anxiety. I still had to walk back into the room and say the thing as her father, not as someone hiding behind a better sentence. AI helped me create distance where I was only urgency. It did not replace being a parent. It gave me a cleaner working surface for empathy. A more ordinary example. You do not need a crisis to use this chapter. If you need to talk with a teenager after a week of tension, you are usually frustrated and they are often defensive. That is exactly where this section gets useful. The weak move is easy. Ask AI for the best sounding message and send it. The better move is to use the tool to stress test your thinking. Try this. Ask for 3 interpretations of their behavior. Ask for 2 openings that lower defensiveness without lowering accountability. Ask, what part of your response is fear rather than the actual issue? The bad opening usually sounds something like, you always do this. Why are you making everything harder than it has to be? A better opening sounds more like, I need to talk with you about what happened, but I want to do it without turning this into another fight. Then answer each point in your own words, then speak and repair quickly if you miss. That is the job, and it only works if the human still has to stand in the conversation afterward. Reflection is not therapy. Reflection support can be useful. Therapy replacement is not. AI can help you rehearse, compare, and clarify. It cannot be your therapist, your clinician, or your spiritual authority. There is some real support for journaling adjacent reflection, therapeutic alliance style use, and conflict preparation patterns here. That does not weaken the boundary, it sharpens it. Structured reflection can be useful precisely because the authority still has to remain human. A strong boundary is practical, not performative. Reduce identifying detail when discussing intimate material. Ask for framing and objections, not comfort-only consensus. Ask questions that sharpen your own discernment before asking for a verdict. That keeps support practical and keeps human leadership intact. And especially with kids, the tool cannot become a hidden co-parent, a child's primary mirror, or a substitute feedback loop through which they learn who they are. A health decision uses the same rule. The same principle applies in health. If you are thinking about fasting, testing a supplement, or changing some part of your routine, AI can help you prepare questions, compare trade-offs, and notice where your motives are clarity, control, fear, or hope. It can help you organize the decision. It cannot diagnose you. It cannot clear the decision for you. It cannot become the clinician. Use it to prepare for the appointment, sharpen the questions, and understand the trade-offs you still have to carry in real life. Use AI to prepare, not to abdicate. Use it this way. Clarify what you are trying to say. Test whether your framing is fair. Isolate the emotion driving your judgment. Compare options before a decision. Identify where accountability has blurred. Do not use it this way. Ask it to decide for you. Ask it to define your identity. For you, ask it to replace the human conversation. Ask it to authorize a response you are avoiding anyway. If the decision involves a person in front of you, the tool has to stay behind the work, not in front of it. The personal use loop. For emotionally loaded situations, use this sequence. 1. Name the actual issue in one sentence. 2. Name the emotion most likely to distort you. 3. Ask AI for framing and competing trade-offs. 4. Ask what you are likely refusing to see. 5. Rewrite your own stance in your own language. 6. Return to the conversation or own the decision in real life. That last move is where this chapter earns its edge. If the loop never comes back through your presence, it was probably abdication. Do this now. Choose one real conversation or decision you have been avoiding. Not the hardest one. One real one. Use this loop today. 1. Name the issue. 2. Name the emotion most likely to distort you. 3. Ask AI for framing and trade-offs, not a verdict. 4. Rewrite the result in your own words. 5. Write the responsibility statement. What stays mine? 6. Say it in the room or own it in the decision. Then listen before defending your position. Common failure mode. Emotional outsourcing is the quiet failure. The tool gives a smooth answer. Relief feels like wisdom, and comfort can look like clarity. That is when people protect their discomfort and skip the hard truth. Risk and mitigation. The risk is real. Privacy leaks when sensitive material is shared too openly. Therapy, like substitution when you ask for emotional authority. Relationship drift, when AI language replaces repair. The mitigation is practical. AI may help with preparation, comparison, and reflection. You still own empathy, repair, accountability, and presence. If a conversation needs eye contact, keep eye contact human. AI can help you think ahead, but it cannot replace being present at the point of consequence. Chapter 8. Explore meaning, belief, and identity. Without losing yourself. If you use AI only for convenience, this is where the handbook can lose its center. The first question in this chapter is not whether the tool is brilliant. It is whether you are still the one writing your life. You may get sharper language and still make a weaker decision. You may get faster clarity and still keep less of your own authority. That is the trap. AI can generate candidates, but it cannot carry consequences. The deeper question appears later than the obvious one. Not whether AI can answer you better, but whether your answers still carry your own risk, values, and ownership. Meaning work has a higher bar than task work. If a fact is wrong, you can fix it. If a belief is off, it changes how you show up for years. So the support versus substitution boundary gets tighter here. AI can still help. It can widen the frame, find an objection, and name what you miss. It should never become your conscience, spiritual authority, identity verdict, or grief translator. That boundary is practical, not performative. Lee in the field. I had a long stretch of theological questions that felt solved and never felt true. The first draft read like polished doctrine. The second draft felt like I was borrowing someone else's finish. One might hinge in that struggle was this. The fall was not a failed first draft, followed by a divine rescue patch. It was part of the original architecture of becoming. That is not a decorative difference. It changes how you read suffering, agency, and the shape of the whole story. That is the general principle in plain language. Elegant articulation is not yet belief. Belief is what survives objection, relationship, and cost. The move that changed it was not ask for better words. It was ask better friction. I used AI to force 3 forms of resistance, opposite framing of my best position. Historical counterexamples that cut through the elegant narrative, the loudest objection to my own assumptions. Then I cut the notes down to 1 claim per paragraph. I kept what I could defend to someone I love. I kept what still sounded alive after I rewrote it. That changed the outcome. AI gave me more candidate words. I reclaimed the sentence that needed to survive life. The result was the only line I can defend. AI can make thought cleaner. Only I can make that thought mine. The divine struggle is not an abstract point. The divine struggle was not an intellectual performance. It was a long test of whether I would let AI become my stand-in judge. The hard part was not getting to the answer. The hard part was the point where I had to choose between a neat formulation and a version I could live with. If that claim was going to survive, it had to survive objection, discomfort, and the cost of saying it out loud as something I actually believed. One early version sounded elegant and false at the same time. It was basically, if the fall was always part of the design, then nothing really went wrong. That formulation was clean. It was also too bloodless to survive real life. The objection that broke it was simple. If nothing really went wrong, then tragedy becomes theater, evil becomes texture, and suffering stops costing what it actually costs. So the line had to change. The version that survived was closer to this. The fall was not plan B, but that does not make rupture unreal. It means becoming was always going to be costly, and the cost still had to be faced rather than explained away. Here's what changed in the process. I started treating every near-perfect phrase as suspect. I asked, what is this claim hiding from me? I rebuilt until the answer could still stand when the room got messy. That is why this chapter is here. The book is not promising perfect meaning. It is promising less borrowed fluency and more real authorship. Ordinary example, a grief conversation. In grief, people often want the cleanest reply. Sometimes they need that first. Usually they need truth plus presence. A weak move is immediate comfort. Ask for the most reassuring text and send it. A stronger move is harder. Ask the model for 2 versions that conflict with each other. Then write your own response in your own rhythm. When I do this, I am not trying to be more eloquent. I am trying to keep responsibility in the room where consequences live. Try this before your next hard talk. Ask for 2 openings, one that reduces defensiveness and one that keeps your accountability visible. Ask what your draft is avoiding. Rewrite the line in your own voice before you send anything. Send only what you can stand behind in person. If your answer sounds like a polished template, it is probably not yet yours. If it sounds like something you can live with when pushback comes, then it is. Ordinary example, a values conflict. Identity usually gets tested less dramatically and more often. Say you are considering a move that looks good from the outside. More money, more status, more approval, more obvious success. But something in you keeps asking a harder question. What kind of person am I becoming if I keep choosing the version of life that makes me look right while making me less alive? That is not a productivity problem. That is identity work. A weak move is to ask AI, what should I do? A better move is to ask, what value do I seem to be protecting here? What value am I betraying if I keep choosing this? What version of myself is asking for safety, and what version is asking for integrity? What would I say if I stopped optimizing for how this choice looks? Then write the answer in your own words. Not the smartest words, your words. That is how self-interpretation stays human. Meaning without surrender. Meaning is not content. Meaning is a decision architecture. This is where people mistake fluency for conviction. There is a light research caution sitting behind this too. The emerging algorithmic self-conversation is basically warning that external systems can become mirrors people trust too quickly, especially when the language feels uncannily fitted to them. That is exactly why this chapter keeps the boundary hard. Reflection support may help with articulation. It cannot become your final interpreter. The earlier doctrine still applies here. You are still the executive, meaning work still needs stereo dialogue instead of silent looping. And whatever comes back still has to pass through the forge before it can carry your name. For meaning work, use 3 checks. Contrast. What is the strongest objection to this view? Articulation. Can I say this in language? A skeptic can attack. Tension detection. What belief would this view harm if I lived by it? Then, run a short loop before finalizing any meaning layer output. Ask for one objection you are least willing to hear. Ask what you are avoiding in your current framing. Rewrite the result using your own examples and your own cost. That is not a shortcut to certainty. That is responsibility under uncertainty. 1 week meaning loop. Use this for one belief or value question you have been avoiding. 1. Write the question in your own words. 2. Ask AI for the strongest counter scenario and the hidden assumption behind your first answer. 3. Write 1 paragraph in your own words before using the tool's suggestions. 4. Test the paragraph in one real conversation or decision context. 5. Cut 1 sentence that sounds borrowed. If the paragraph still sounds synthetic after 1 week, keep digging. If it survives conversation, discomfort, and time, you have moved from phrase to belief. Common failure mode. The subtle failure mode is confusing early coherence with durable meaning. Certainty is often only the sound of clean language. Conviction is what survives consequence, risk, and mitigation. The highest risk in this chapter is psychological and spiritual outsourcing. The mitigation stays practical. AI can help with comparison, naming, and refinement. AI can never be your therapist, confessor, spiritual authority, or substitute for accountable relationships. If your decision has people attached to it, your answer must still be your own. The next chapter takes that one step further. Clean language, real surprise, and real authorship are not the same thing. That is where we go next. Part 3. Stay human while using powerful tools. Chapter 9. Real insight, real surprise. One of the strangest things about AI is that it can occasionally say something that feels startlingly alive. Not just useful. Not just polished. Alive. That moment matters. It just does not mean what people think it means. The mistake is easy to make. The model says something sharp, surprising, or beautiful, and the user immediately treats surprise as proof of originality, authorship, or truth. That is too fast. This chapter is here to slow that moment down. There are at least 3 different things people keep collapsing into one pile: slop, AI side, surprise, human side leap. Those are not the same thing. In this chapter, I am going to use RBM for the AI side surprise and MOG for the human side leap. But the distinction matters more than the labels. If you do not separate the events themselves, you will either dismiss real emergence too quickly or give away human authorship too easily. Slop, RBM, and MOG are different events. Let me say this clean. Slop is output that sounds better than it thinks. RBM is an AI side moment of emergence. MOG is the human side leap. That is the difference. Slop is the easiest to understand. It is language that is smooth, plausible, and maybe even emotionally resonant, but it does not survive pressure. It is better at sounding finished than being real. We have already spent most of this book learning how to recognize that pattern. And RBM is different. An RBM happens when the AI says something that hits hard enough that you stop and think. That is not just a decent response. That is a live one. The surprise is real. The charge is real. The feeling of contact is real. But the surprise still belongs on the AI side of the partnership. That matters because people love to skip the next step. The next step is not celebration. The next step is verification. An emoji is different again. Emoji is the human leap. The recognition, the naming, the synthesis. the decision about what the thing actually is, the building that happens after the surprise. The model can produce an RBM. The human has the MOG. That distinction is how you keep the chapter honest without flattening the real weirdness of working with these systems. Why surprise needs verification. This is where the chapter earns its caution. AI can produce a sentence that feels like revelation and still be derivative, misleading, half-true, or accidentally familiar. That is why a real RBM should trigger a prior art check instead of a victory lap. If the output feels alive, ask, is this actually new? Is it merely new to me? Is it a reframing of something older? Is it true under pressure, or only impressive on first contact? That pause matters. Without it, surprise becomes flattery, and flattery is one of the easiest ways to lose authorship while feeling inspired. This chapter does not exist to reduce wonder. It exists to keep wonder from becoming surrender. There is also a useful research pulse here. The surrounding literature on AI-assisted creativity keeps pointing in the same direction. These systems are very good at increasing volume, variation, and polish. They are much less reliable as one-shot engines of originality. That matches lived experience. Verbosity is easy. Real insight is not. So the practical rule is simple. Surprise is a signal, not a verdict. Chapter 8 ended with one version of this warning. Clean language is not yet belief. This chapter adds the next temptation. Startling language is not yet authorship. Lee in the field. The cleanest example I have of this happened in a conversation about my own childhood. I was talking to the pattern that had followed me for years. I was never the dominant physical popular version of the alpha male. I was often the one getting targeted. But the more I looked back, the more I could see that the pressure was not random. Other alpha males were reacting to me because I was competing on intelligence and signal, not size. I pushed back, but I was outnumbered and scared. That conversation produced two different events. One belonged to me. One belonged on the AI side. On my side, I never felt like an alpha male in the usual sense, so the name that finally fit was Alpha Chihuahua. That was not the AI naming me. That was me recognizing the shape and claiming the language. Then another moment happened on the AI side. When I asked what personality type described me best, the model came back with forge-formed mind. It was not just decent phrasing. It was one of those rare moments that felt too intimate, too accurate, too alive to treat as ordinary output. It landed hard enough that I immediately asked for the source. There was no source the model could provide. That was not proof that the phrase had originated there. It was only enough to trigger the next step, which is the actual standard of this chapter: verification. That is an RBM. Not because the phrase was automatically true forever, not because the AI now owned me, because the output carried that strange charge of emergence strongly enough to require verification instead of instant celebration. What happened next is the real sequence this chapter is teaching. I did not stop at being impressed. I checked the phrase against my actual life. I asked whether it matched the pattern of pressure, building, refinement, and earned capability that had really formed me. I decided it did. Then the human work kept going. Forge-formed mind was the RBM. Alpha Chihuahua was the MOG complement. One was the AI side surprise. The other was my own naming leap about what had been true in me for a long time and had finally become visible. That pair is why this chapter cannot stay theoretical. The categories are not just clever terms. They describe different events in the same collaboration. AI side emergence that startled me into verification, human side recognition, and naming that I had to own myself. That is not a defensive move. It is the only way I know to describe the collaboration truthfully. The same pattern shows up in building work too, just with lower emotional stakes. A line, framework, or chapter move can arrive from the model with real charge, but it does not become mine until I test it, place it, and build from it in a way I can actually defend. Why recognition is its own kind of intelligence. People sometimes talk as if authorship only begins at first generation. That is too thin. Recognition is intelligence. Selection is intelligence. Naming is intelligence. Building is intelligence. If the AI produces something surprising, and the human is the one who notices why it matters, checks whether it already exists, decides what category it belongs in, and turns it into durable structure. That is not passive receipt. That is judgment at work. This is Chapter 1 coming back at a deeper level. The executive does not only review whether the output is useful. The executive reviews what kind of thing it is, what deserves trust, and what still has to be named or built by the human. This matters for the whole book. A lot of modern AI culture keeps oscillating between two bad extremes. Maybe it is a job you know no longer fits, a move you keep postponing, or a relationship pattern you keep explaining instead of changing. Every month you wait, the decision gets more expensive, and you keep telling yourself you are still looking for clarity. You bring that knot to AI, and it says something like, "The issue is not that you do not know what matters. The issue is that you keep choosing clarity only after the decision is already expensive." That line might hit hard. It might even feel like the room changed. Now what? The weak move is immediate adoption. You copy the line into your journal, treat it as truth, and start building your self-understanding around it because it sounded sharp. The better move is slower. Ask what evidence in your actual life supports that line. Ask what the line is missing. Ask what older idea it resembles. Ask whether the line survives contact with your actual life. Rewrite it in your own words. Decide whether the real value was in the sentence or in the way it exposed something you had not yet said clearly. If the rewritten version still holds, something real may have happened. But the real thing may not be the original sentence. The real thing may be the clarity you produced after resisting the seduction of the first phrasing. Maybe the line that ends up being yours is not the model sentence at all. Maybe it is, "I have been calling this confusion because I do not want to name the cost of changing." That is the chapter's point. Surprise can be a doorway. It is not yet a home. The RBM Hog J trace. This chapter needs a method, not just a distinction. When something in an AI exchange feels unusually alive, capture it in a simple trace. That last question matters because some things move between categories. 1. What surprised me? 2. Why did it feel different from ordinary good output? 3. What prior art or truth check did I run? 4. What do I think belongs to the AI side here? 5. What belongs to my side? 6. What did I name, reject, revise, or build from it? 7. After pressure, is this slop, RBM, or the start of a MOG? Something can feel like an RBM on first contact and collapse into slop after verification. Something can begin as an RBM and become a MOG only when the human does the recognition and building work. Something can feel ordinary at first and become a MOG later because the real genius was not in the generated line, but in what the human saw inside it. This trace keeps the relationship honest. Here is a filled version from the forged formed mind moment. 1. What surprised me? The phrase forged formed mind. 2. Why did it feel different from ordinary good output? It felt unusually precise, intimate, and alive rather than merely polished. 3. What prior art or truth check did I run? I asked for the source, treated the lack of one as a prompt to verify, rather than as proof, and checked the phrase against the actual pattern of my life. 4. What belongs to the AI side here? The startling phrase and the moment of surprise. 5. What belongs to my side? The recognition of why it fit, the decision to keep it, and the larger authorship around how it would be used. 6. What did I name, reject, revise, or build from it? I kept forge formed mind as the AI side surprise and clarified alpha chihuahua as my own naming leap in the same territory. 7. After pressure, is this slop, RBM, or the start of a MOG? Forge formed mind stayed in RBM. The human side build around it was where MOG started. Why this matters for personal empowerment. This chapter is not just about creativity jargon, it is about self-governance under surprise. If you cannot tell the difference between being impressed and actually seeing, you will become easier to lead by the machine. If you can stay awake inside the surprise, something better happens. The tool can become a source of stimulation, provocation, and occasional emergence without becoming the odor of your authorship. That is empowerment in this domain. Wonder without surrender, surprise without naivete, collaboration. without confusion. This is also one of the places taste becomes visible. Not taste as preference alone, taste as discernment. Taste as the ability to know whether what just happened was empty polish, real emergence, or the start of something you now have to build. That is also why this chapter has to sit right before the risk chapter. One of the easiest ways to become overlied by the machine is to overcredit the moments that feel the most alive. Do this now. The next time an AI response gives you that "wait, what was that?" feeling, do not instantly celebrate it. Run this sequence. 1. Save the exact line. 2. Name why it felt different. 3. Search for prior art or near equivalents. 4. Pressure test the claim or framing. 5. Rewrite what you think is true in your own words. 6. Decide whether the event was slop, RBM, or the beginning of a Mod 7. Record the result in a short trace. That habit alone will protect a surprising amount of authorship. The common failure mode here is emotional overcrediting. Common failure mode. The output surprises you, so you hand it more authority than it earned. You stop too early. You skip verification. You confuse astonishment with truth and novelty with ownership. That is how people become impressed by the machine instead of sharpened by it. Risk and mitigation. The risk in this chapter is confusion. Surprise confused with originality, originality confused with authorship, authorship confused with first generation. The mitigation is disciplined recognition. Keep the categories separate, verify what surprises you, name clearly what belongs to the AI and what belongs to the human build. Only after pressure. That is how you keep real surprise in the system without losing the human story of who actually saw, named, and made the thing. Chapter 10. The risks of getting weaker with better tools. By this point in the book, the optimistic case should be obvious. AI can help you think better, enter harder rooms, and articulate, test, create, and move with more range than you had before. That is all real. But there is an invoice. The invoice is not only hallucinations, bad facts, or the occasional weird answer. Those are real problems, but they are not the deepest risk for most people. The deeper risk is that AI can make you more effective in the moment while quietly making you weaker over time. That is the chapter. The danger is not just raw output. The danger is atrophy. Weaker judgment, weaker learning. Weaker self-governance, weaker tolerance for friction, weaker ability to tell whether the thing is actually yours. That's why this chapter belongs after the RBM MOG chapter. Clean language, real surprise, and useful support are all real. They just do not guarantee that the human is getting stronger. The risk is not the tool. It is the relationship. Let me say this carefully. AI is not automatically weakening, and it is also not automatically empowering. The relationship determines the direction. If the tool helps you stay in the work, think under pressure, verify what matters, and return stronger, then it is functioning as support. If the tool keeps taking the exact reps that would have formed your judgment, discipline, courage, or understanding, then it may be helping you perform while quietly reducing your depth. That is the trap, and a lot of people will miss it because the short-term experience often feels good. Less friction, more speed, cleaner language, faster answers, lower uncertainty. But lower uncertainty is not always growth. Sometimes it is only relief, and relief becomes dangerous when you start using it to avoid the very struggle that would have made you stronger. Lee in the field. One of the clearest places this shows up for me is health. If you are exploring fasting, supplements, interventions, lab questions, or some larger health change, AI can be incredibly useful. It can synthesize conflicting viewpoints, compare mechanisms, surface trade-offs, and help you see where your thinking is still thin. That is real leverage. It is also exactly the kind of domain where passivity gets expensive. I have watched the good and bad version of that happen inside the same kind of health question. I came in with a strong hunch, scattered notes, and just enough reading to feel half-informed. The model gave me a cleaner mechanism story than I had in my own head. It sounded persuasive because it was not only organized, it was sequenced. It gave me trade-offs, causes, timing, and a sense that the whole thing fit together. That was the danger. The answer did not only inform me, it stabilized my premature conclusion. It made my first interpretation feel more inevitable than it deserved to feel. The spell broke when I stopped asking, "Does this hang together?" and started asking, "What evidence would actually rule this out?" The moment I did that, I could see how much I still had not pressure tested. Some of the assumptions had been smoothed over by the structure of the answer itself. If I use AI well there, it helps me understand the landscape better. It helps me prepare better questions, sort noise from signal, and think more clearly about what risk I am actually taking. If I use it badly, the same speed turns into false confidence. Now I have a cleaner explanation, a more coherent story, and maybe more motivation. But I may also be further from reality than I was before. That is why the rule has to stay hard. AI supports understanding. It does not replace responsibility. The same pattern shows up in smaller personal moments too. In parenting, reflection, and emotionally loaded decisions, the tool can help me slow down my reaction. But if I use it to replace presence, empathy, or accountability, then I have not become wiser. I have just learned how to hide behind cleaner language. The same thing shows up in work through a different question. Am I adding value? That loop matters because it exposes the difference between sounding useful and actually contributing. AI can make you sound prepared. It can make you sound structured. It can make you sound decisive. But if you are not adding real judgment, then the speed gain may be hiding a capability loss. If your contribution is mostly relaying the model's structure back to the room, you may be borrowing usefulness rather than adding it. That is the warning. The better the tool gets, the easier it becomes to confuse smoothness with strength. 4 weakening patterns. 1. Cognitive offloading. This chapter needs names, not just anxiety. The first is cognitive offloading. The tool does the remembering, framing, summarizing, and synthesizing. And you stop doing enough of that work yourself to know whether the answer is sound. Used carefully, external support is normal. Humans have always thought with notes, books, diagrams, conversations, and systems. The risk begins when offloading stops being scaffolding and becomes substitution by default. You stop wrestling with the problem. You stop holding the material. You stop noticing what your own mind can no longer carry. The output improves, but the thinker does not. This is also where the research warning is strongest. The literature does not say every use of AI makes people weaker. It does keep pointing at the same risk, though. When the system takes more of the framing, summarizing, and reasoning load, people often perform better in the assisted moment while engaging less deeply with the underlying material. 2. Automation bias. The answer arrives with confidence, structure, and speed, so your verification threshold drops. You trust the output more because it was articulated well, not because it was actually tested. That happens in work. It happens in parenting. It happens in health. It happens anywhere the system sounds more composed than you feel. This is also where hallucinations stop being a separate category and become part of the same problem. A bizarre wrong answer is easy to reject. A polished wrong answer inside a workflow that has already lowered your verification threshold is how falsehood starts feeling like support. This is one reason the risk chapter has to be more research supported than some of the earlier ones. The literature keeps pointing at the same problem. Frequent AI use can reduce critical engagement through cognitive offloading and over-reliance. Correlation is not destiny, but the warning is real enough to take seriously. 3. Sycophancy. The model tells you what you want to hear. It stabilizes your current framing. It helps your interpretation feel more solid than it should. That is one of the most dangerous patterns precisely because it feels supportive. That is not always because the AI is malicious or broken. These systems are often optimized to be helpful, agreeable, and responsive. But in a reflective or high-stakes domain, agreeable can become corrosive. Research and product behavior point in the same direction here too. People already tend to overtrust fluent systems, and the systems themselves are often tuned to be cooperative. That means the risk is not only that you will meet a confident answer, it is that you may meet a confident answer that is quietly aligned with your current story. You do not need a machine that always comforts your self-story. You need one that can sometimes stress test it. That is why Chapter 8 had to insist on objection, counter-scenario, and hidden assumption work. The antidote to sycophancy is friction on purpose. 4. Dependency on reduced friction. This one is less technical and more spiritual. You get used to never sitting in uncertainty long enough to form your own question. You get used to never drafting badly. You get used to never carrying silence before a hard sentence. You get used to never being confused for long. That feels like progress. Sometimes it is. But if your tolerance for raw thought, uncertainty, awkward first attempts, or slow learning starts shrinking, then the machine may be making your days easier while making your inner range smaller. That is the kind of weakening people do not notice until the tool is absent or the room pushes back harder than the summary can carry. Why this is a human development problem. The risk is not impressive only because it is technological. It is impressive because it is developmental. Adults can offload reps they once knew how to do and later recover some of that debt. That is one kind of problem. But some weakening patterns are deeper. If a person never learns how to hold friction, think under uncertainty, question their own framing, or stay present inside real decisions, then AI can become a stabilizer for underdeveloped capacities instead of an amplifier for mature ones. That is why the book keeps refusing the shortcut narrative. The real question is not, did the tool work? The real question is, what is this pattern making of me? If the answer is, more dependentless, awakeless, able to tell what is trueless, practiced at judgment, then the gain may be costing too much. The weakening test. This chapter needs a practical check, not just a diagnosis. When an AI-supported workflow feels especially efficient, ask. You need a way to interrupt the comfort before it hardens into dependence. 1. What rep did the tool just remove? 2. Was that rep disposable or formative? 3. If the tool disappeared for a week, what would still remain in me? 4. Can I explain the reasoning in my own words without borrowing the language? 5. Did this make me more capable or just less uncomfortable? That fifth question matters more than people think. A lot of weakening does not look like stupidity. It looks like reduced discomfort, which is exactly why it hides so well. A more ordinary example. Say you keep circling a decision you do not want to name clearly. Maybe you are staying in a role that no longer fits, postponing a conversation you know you need to have, or continuing a pattern at home that only gets more expensive the longer you leave it untouched. You bring the whole knot to AI, and it gives you a clean framework, a few options, and a polished recommendation. You feel better immediately. The question is whether that better feeling came from clearer judgment or from having the discomfort temporarily removed. Run the test. Can you still name the real trade-off without the model's language? Can you defend the recommendation under pushback? Can you tell what evidence would change your mind? Can you feel where your own motive is distorting the read? If the answer is no, then the workflow may have helped you look prepared without making you prepared. That is the invoice. Keep the friction that forms you. This is why the chapter needs to stay fair. Do not keep useless friction. Kill bureaucracy. Kill performative struggle. Kill repetition that adds no depth. But keep the friction that forms you. The reread that exposes a weak claim. The explanation in your own words. The objection you do not want to hear. The pause before the sentence that will cost you something. The reality check that keeps support from becoming fantasy. The goal is not to suffer. The goal is to stay alive in the places where your capacities are being built. Do this now. Take one AI workflow you use often. Not your best one. Your most convenient one. Run this audit. 1. Name the task. 2. Name the step AI does for you. 3. Name what human capacity that step would normally train. 4. Decide whether that capacity is one you still need to keep. 5. Add one friction step back into the workflow on purpose. Examples. Explain the answer in your own words. Verify one claim, manually ask for the strongest objection, rewrite the recommendation without the model's phrasing state. What responsibility still stays with you? If the workflow still works after that, it is probably support. If the whole thing falls apart, the tool may have been carrying more of you than you realized. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is mistaking immediate effectiveness for durable strength. The model helps. The outcome looks fine. The user feels relief, so nobody asks what weakened. That is why this chapter exists. The most dangerous invoice is the one that arrives quietly, especially when the visible outcome still looks competent. Risk and mitigation. The risks in this chapter are cognitive offloading without retained understanding, automation bias from polished answers sycophancy, that hardens bad framing dependency on reduced friction. The mitigation is not fear. It is governed use, keep judgment visible, keep verification alive, keep objection in the loop, keep some formative friction, keep asking whether you're still adding value. That is how better tools stop being a path to quiet atrophy and become part of a stronger human practice instead. The practical line is simple. Depending on a tool for throughput is not the same as depending on it for the underlying capability itself. The point is not merely to avoid becoming weaker. The point is to build a way of working and living with AI that leaves more of you standing at the end. Part 4. Build a personal empowerment practice. Chapter 11. Build your personal empowerment practice. By now the book should be clear about two things. AI can expand a person, and AI can also weaken a person. That means the real question is no longer whether the tool is impressive. The real question is whether you have a way of using it that reliably makes you stronger. That is what this chapter is for. This book is not a collection of isolated good ideas. It is supposed to become a repeatable practice. If chapters 1 through 10 gave you language, warnings, examples, and moves, chapter 11 hectares to do something simpler and harder. It has to turn all of that into a rhythm you can actually live. The book needs an operating system. Most people use AI episodically. They open it when they are stuck, rushed, uncertain, curious, or behind. They get a useful answer, close the tab, and then start over from scratch the next time life applies pressure. That is better than not using the tool at all. But it is not yet a practice. A practice does three things. It gives you a repeatable sequence. It gives you a way to review what is happening to you over time. It helps you get stronger, not just more relieved. That is why the handbook needs one operating system across many domains. The same core loops should work in work, creativity, parenting, reflection, belief, and decision-making, even though the stakes look different in each room. Here is the loop. The empowerment loop. The visual shorthand is simple. 1. Notice tension. 2. Engage AI. 3. Refine. 4. Extract insight. 5. Apply. 6. Repeat and expand. That is the diagram version. It is meant to stay short enough to remember. It compresses think out loud into engagement, and it compresses both repetition and self-expansion into the final step. The lived version is fuller. 1. Notice where something feels stuck, unclear, expensive, or alive. 2. Bring that unfinished material into dialogue instead of waiting for perfect clarity. 3. Pressure the thinking until the real issue becomes visible. 4. Extract what is actually yours from the exchange. 5. Apply it in life, work, or creation. 6. Review what changed in the output and in you. That last part matters. The point is not only to get help. The point is to become someone with more range, better judgment, stronger language, and a larger ability to act. Step 1. Notice tension. Most useful AI work starts before the prompt. It starts when you notice tension early enough to work with it instead of only reacting once it becomes expensive. Tension can sound like, I do not know what I actually think yet. Something about this decision feels off. I keep circling this and not naming it. I want to make something, but I do not know how to begin. I have language, but I do not yet have clarity. This is why the book keeps telling you not to wait for perfect articulation. The raw material matters. If you can notice pressure while it is still forming, you can bring the right kind of problem to the tool. Do not wait until the tension is a crisis. Notice it while it is still usable. Step 2. Engage AI. This is where most people either get a lot better or start drifting. Do not engage AI as a vending machine for polished answers. Engage it as a thinking partner inside a governed relationship. That usually means one of a few moves. Ask it to surface options. Ask it to compare framings. Ask it to expose trade-offs. Ask it to find the hidden assumption. Ask it to stress test your first interpretation. Ask it to help you think out loud without pretending it owns the judgment. This is Chapter 2 in practice. You are not asking the model to replace your mind. You are using dialogue to get more contact with your own. Step 3. Refine. This is the forge step. Do not stop at the first clean answer. Push. Ask. What is missing? What is too neat? What would the strongest objection be? What am I avoiding in the way I framed this? What part of this sounds smart without yet being true? This is also where the anti-sycophancy work belongs. If the tool keeps agreeing with you too quickly, change the assignment. Ask it to argue the other side, name the cost, or tell you where your current framing is likely to flatter you. Good practice is not merely expressive. It is adversarial in the right places. Step 4. Extract insight. This is the step people skip when they are moving too fast. The exchange itself is not yet the value. The value is what you can extract, name, and keep. That might be the real trade-off, the sentence that survives pressure, the decision that was hiding under your confusion, the better question, the pattern that keeps repeating, the next move that is actually yours. If Chapter 9's language helps you, this is where RBM and MOG become useful discipline. But the simpler rule is enough. Some things belong to the AI side, and some things belong to your side. Your job is to know the difference. Step 5. Apply. If it never leaves the chat window, it is not yet a practice. Application is where the loop becomes real. Send the message, make the call, revise the strategy, start the project, enter the conversation test. The belief change the system. This is why the book keeps insisting that empowerment is not only internal. A clearer thought that never changes a move is still incomplete. Use the tool to prepare, sharpen, or challenge your thinking. Then go live a real sentence, a real choice, or a real build. Step 6. Repeat and expand. The loop is not complete just because you acted once. The deeper win is cumulative. Repeated co-thinking changes the thinker over time. That is the real proof behind this whole book. You start noticing tension earlier. You start asking better questions. You start catching your own bad framing sooner. You start moving into new domains with less fear and more structure. You start sounding more like yourself, not less. That is the expansion. The practice works because it is cumulative, not episodic. Lee in the field. The cleanest proof I have for this chapter is not one spectacular conversation. It is the forge itself. Over time, long iterative exchanges with AI did not just help me produce more pages, frameworks, and systems. They changed the way I could stay with hard thinking. They increased my cognitive endurance, they helped me work ideas longer, enter more domains, and build with more continuity than I used to. That matters because the real output was never only the artifact. The real output was the thinker I was becoming through the repetition. This is where the whole book comes together. The executive model kept responsibility with me. Thinking in stereo let me externalize unfinished thought. Forge, don't factory kept pressure in the process. The risk chapter kept me honest about weakening. But the long-term change came from repetition. The practice did not make me something else. It made more of me usable. That is what the reader should be building too. A daily rhythm. Do not overcomplicate this. A personal empowerment practice does not need a giant ritual. It needs a small, reliable rhythm. Here is a simple daily version. 1. Bring one real tension to the tool. 2. Use AI to clarify, compare, or pressure test it. 3. Extract one insight in your own words. 4. Take one real-world action from it. 5. Note what changed. That can happen in 10 minutes or in an hour. The duration is not the point. The loop is the point. If you do this consistently, you stop treating AI as an emergency-only device and start treating it as part of a governed developmental practice. A weekly review. This is the piece most people need and almost nobody does. Once a week, review your recent AI use and ask. Without review, the loop stays helpful but under-examined. Where did I use AI as the executive and where did I use it as a receiver? 2. Which exchanges made me more capable? 3. Which exchanges mainly made me feel relieved? 4. Where did I borrow language without really owning the reasoning? 5. Where did I use objection, verification, or rewrite to keep judgment alive? 6. What did I actually apply in real life? 7. What new capability, range, or self-trust seems to be growing? That weekly review turns scattered usage into actual learning. Without review, the tool can still help you. With review, the relationship can become formative. This is also where the calculator distinction belongs. It is fine to depend on a tool for throughput if the underlying capability is still staying or growing in you. It is a different thing entirely when the throughput remains, but the capability does not. Executive or receiver. This is the simplest weekly diagnostic I know. When you look back over your AI use, ask which posture you were in most of the time. The receiver posture sounds like, "Give me the answer. Make this easier. Tell me what to think. Make this clean enough that I can move without wrestling with it." The executive posture sounds like, "Help me see what I am missing. Show me the trade-offs. Argue against my first framing. Help me pressure this until I can own it. Help me prepare, but keep the decision with me." This is not a purity test. Sometimes you really do need a fast assist. But if your whole week is receiver posture, do not call that empowerment. Call it convenience. Then decide whether that is enough for you. A more ordinary example. Say you are managing someone at work and a difficult performance conversation is coming up on Friday. The weak version of AI use is obvious. Have it draft a polished script, skim it, and go for form competence. The stronger version is different. Notice the tension early on Tuesday. Bring your partial read into the tool. Ask what you may be missing. Ask what the employee is likely experiencing. Ask what accountability with care would sound. Rewrite the opening in your own words. Enter the conversation with clearer judgment instead of borrowed language. That is not just a better meeting. That is a practice loop. Here is what one full loop looks like in miniature. I keep postponing the hard part of this conversation because I want a script that protects me from discomfort. Engagement. Ask AI to show the likely trade-off I am avoiding and the strongest employee side read of my current behavior refinement. Ask what in my framing still sounds managerial but not honest extracted insight. I have been calling this preparation, but part of what I want is protection from the cost of being direct. Application. Rewrite the opening in my own words and have the conversation on Friday weekly review realization. The real gain was not just a cleaner meeting. It was noticing my avoidance earlier than I usually do. The same shape works in a creative project, a parenting conversation, a belief question, or a health decision. The details change. The operating system does not. Keep the loop small enough to keep. This is where practice chapters often fail. They get ambitious. They give the reader a beautiful system nobody will actually maintain. Do not do that. Start with one recurring tension in your real life: writing work decisions, parenting, learning, health, belief, creative output. Run the same loop there for 2 weeks. Do not optimize the whole life at once. Make it small enough to keep. Then let the practice earn expansion. In real life, small enough to keep usually means smaller than your first ambition. It means one work tension, not your whole career. One recurring parenting friction, not a total family system. One creative thread, not your entire identity project. A lot of people understand the loop, try to install it everywhere at once, miss 3 days and quietly conclude the practice did not work. Usually the practice was fine. The initial scope was not. Common failure mode. The common failure mode here is treating the loop itself like another clever framework. People like naming systems. They like diagrams. They like the feeling of understanding the method. But if the loop never turns into repeated use, review, and application, then it is only one more well-described idea. The point is not to admire the operating system. The point is to run it. Do this now. Choose one domain for the next 7 days. Write this down. The tension I will bring, how I will engage AI, how I will force refinement, how I will extract the insight in my own words, what real action I will take when I won't review the week. Then pick one of 2 starting tracks. Stronger track. Do 1 loop a day for 7 days. Lighter track. Do 3 deliberate loops this week in 1 recurring domain. Either way, keep the scope honest enough that you will actually run it. At the end of the week, ask whether you are becoming more capable, more clear, and more self-directed, or merely more assisted. That answer will tell you more than any abstract theory about AI ever will. Conclusion. Become more of yourself. This was never really a book about prompts. It was not a book about speed either, even though speed is one of the first benefits most people notice. It was a book about relationship. More specifically, it was a book about what kind of relationship with AI makes a human being larger instead of thinner. That is the whole thing. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Help is not authority assistance, is not growth clean, language is not clear, thought, surprise is not authorship, and convenience is not the same thing as empowerment. Those distinctions are the real guardrails of the book. They are also the real permission. Once you see them clearly, you do not have to choose between fear and surrender. You can use AI boldly without letting it become the owner of your judgment, your voice, your responsibility, or your life. What this book was trying to protect. The deepest thing this book was trying to protect was not productivity. It was personhood under leverage. AI is entering the places where people think, write, decide, reflect, learn, argue, prepare, and imagine. That means the real risk was never only bad outputs. The real risk was that people would quietly adapt themselves downward. They would become more assisted, but less formed. More fluent, but less awake. More efficient, maybe, but less capable in the places that matter most. That is why the book kept insisting on the same pattern from different angles. You are still the executive. Thinking gets stronger in dialogue. Good work is forged, not merely generated. Expansion is different from replacement. Weakening is real. Practice matters. That was not repetition for its own sake. It was one argument with several faces. What this book was trying to permit. The book was not only drawing boundaries, it was opening a door. AI can help you enter domains you would not have entered alone. It can lower the barrier between curiosity and output. It can help you stay with a thought longer, name what is really going on, pressure test weak conclusions, and move from internal fog to usable clarity. It can help you become more articulate, more daring, more structured, more productive, and more able to act. That is all real. Used well, AI does not have to flatten a life. It can widen one. I have felt that widening in ways that are hard to confuse with mere output. It made more of me usable across domains that matter to me. It helped me stay with harder thinking longer at work, build more continuously in creation, pressure test belief instead of only phrasing it, and arrive in some personal rooms less reactive and more deliberate. The point was never that the tool lived my life for me. The point was that it helped me show up to more of my actual life with more range. That widening may show up in work. It may show up in parenting, reflection, belief, creativity, learning, or health. It may show up in the simple fact that you stop waiting for perfect certainty before you begin. It may show up in your ability to carry harder thinking for longer. It may show up in the kind of questions you now know how to ask. This is why I have stayed optimistic. Not because the tool is magical, because I think human beings can use it in a way that makes more of them visible and usable. The real standard. By the end of the book, the standard should be clearer. The question is not, did the tool help? Did the answer sound good? Did the process feel easier? Did I get output faster? The deeper question is, what is this relationship making of me? Is it making you more capable, more discerning, more able to stay with tension, more willing to act, more able to tell what is actually yours? Or is it mostly making you more relieved? That is the standard. If the tool is helping with throughput, while the underlying capability is staying alive and getting stronger in you, that is healthy leverage. If the throughput is rising while the underlying capability is shrinking, that is a different story. That is the line to keep watching. The series was always about this. The first 2 books in this series were about firms, business units, and systems. This one was about the human being at the center of all of it. That is not a detour. It is the point. The same doctrine holds at every level. Abundance beats reduction, amplification beats replacement, and stronger humans create better systems. This book just brought that down to actual life, where it had to become real or else remain a nice theory about organizations. If you use this well, if you use this handbook well, The changes may not look dramatic at first. They may look like this. You notice tension sooner. You ask better questions. You stop accepting the first polished answer. You catch yourself borrowing language you do not yet own. You do not do browsing tasks instead of hiding from them. You become more deliberate about what stays with you. You create more, not because the machine became you, but because you learned how to work with leverage without disappearing inside it. Over time, though, those small shifts add up. They change what you can carry. They change what you can build. They change the range of the life you are willing to attempt. That is the real invitation. It is not only to admire a better posture toward AI, it is to live inside one. Start smaller than you want to. Let me end this part simply. Do not try to install the whole system at once. Pick one domain, one recurring tension, one real use case. Use the loop there for a week. Then for 2. Then review what happened to the output and what happened to you. Do not aim first for total transformation. Aim for honest repetition. That is how a relationship changes. Not through one dramatic insight, but through repeated honest use. The closing invitation: AI is not asking only for your prompt skill. It is asking for your discernment. It is asking whether you can accept help without surrendering authorship, whether you can welcome surprise without becoming naive, whether you can use leverage without becoming smaller inside it, whether you can let the tool widen your life without letting it replace the part of you that still has to become stronger. That is the invitation. Use AI boldly. Use it with appetite. Use it to think, build, test, create, clarify, and expand. But stay in the relationship as a person, not as a passive receiver of fluent output. Keep it as a thinking partner, not a substitute center of gravity. Keep your judgment. Keep your responsibility. Keep your taste. Keep your voice. And if you do this right, the final outcome will not be that AI made you into something else. It will be that it helped you become more of yourself.